We are Lucian and Duy, and we are here today for the section on AEM Headless with hybrid rendering front-end frameworks. So in this section, we will dive into the dynamic intersection of AEM and today's front-end frameworks, reshaping the web app development for AEM Headless. A bit of ourselves. We just took the photo like 10 minutes before at adaptTo. So my name is Duy Nguyen. So I'm a software engineer at Adobe Basel. My main focus is on developer experience and front-end JS technologies.
I'm Lucian. I'm a senior computer scientist at Adobe, and I'm with AEM for a while.
Okay, so as we dive into the menu of this section, well, we are at 11:30, so we hope we serve some tasty appetizers before the main lunch. We will quickly go through the landscape and provide an overview of the JavaScript frameworks, the gateway for you to enable, well, the gateway that enables you to build highly interactive web applications. And then let's have a look at the headless architecture that we observe going from a full Java CMS on the JVM to a fully decoupled one on headless. And then we will deep dive into the hybrid rendering for headless CMS, uncovering its potential and benefits. And finally, we will showcase all that in actions using two popular frameworks, React and SvelteKit, which are supported by WYSIWYG editing for headless content. Well, a bit, you've seen a bit of what Acto and Saranya have shown, and we will show it more in the framework context. All right, first of all, let's have a look at the modern front-end framework landscape in 2023 and beyond. So this diagram shows the positive and negative split of popular front-end frameworks among developers. So the two red shades means that people either would not use or not interested, and the green one means they would use it again or at least interested to learn. So together they mean the stickiness, which means either would not use or use again, and the hype, which means either you're not interested at all to learn something or you are very interested to learn it. So now I'm in the green bars for some of them. The top favorite one frameworks are React, Svelte, and Vue.js, which have strong support for server and client rendering using out of the box or the community frameworks. And then as a comparison, this diagram shows the same positive and negative split for the rendering framework. So those based on React are again favored by a good number of developers, such as Next.js, Astro, and Remix, besides SvelteKit for Svelte and Nuxt for Vue.js, which follow after. And then, for example, Gatsby were pretty popular in the past, but because of it mainly support like static site rendering, so it's slightly lag behind nowadays. Now, let's go into the details of how JS hybrid rendering would fit into the headless CMS ecosystem. So what really matters for app developers today? First of all, that's developer experience. So how fast can you have your first app running with the lowest learning curve? Do you just need to install like one single tool, a Swiss knife, to start get going with that stack? And last but not least, how to easily set up like the the CI/CD pipeline to deploy your application from dev to review to production. Second, in the today fast-paced digital world, web performance is not just a nice to have. It's crucial that can make or break your application success. So faster load times keep your user engaged, reducing the bouncing rate. It also boosts SEO rankings and driving more organic traffic. So normally, fast sites converts more visitor, improving the return of investment. That's why we think that prioritizing web performance is not just a choice, it's a necessity. Luckily, these two are not selling alone. Hybrid rendering emerged as a bridge between those and connect them naturally. It reduces the divide between the back-end and front-end development. What's more, the certain part of your website can be rendered server-side so that you can effectively reduce the computational load on your browser. So it elevates both developer experience and the overall performance of your web applications. Let's answer the first question: where does the code run? So I guess many of you here are AEM developers. You're familiar with writing Java servlet or JSP script to render your front-end application within the JVM runtime. For me, as like the skill set today is a bit different for like freshmen. Java is no longer the first language being taught in programming courses at school. Instead, the evolution of JS frameworks create a wave of frameworks, as mentioned earlier, that can run both on the server side and client side. The content source is the AEM. Your website is delivered to the client browser. Yet, instead of writing custom code in Java and run it in the JVM, Headless brings you the possibility of writing custom code in JS and run it in the JS runtime. What is more exciting is that you can run both server and client JS code on the same runtime, as opposed to before that you have no JS for the server versus the browser client JS. OK, so now you know where the code runs. How about authoring the content? With the rendering taking place outside of the CMS core, the need arises for a visual editor that can seemingly comprehend the intricacies of your application and then save the updates back to the CMS, or in a decoupled way. As Sharanya and Aktu already showed earlier, Universal Editor give a perfect answer to that. And here we have more. We'll see how it joins forces with hybrid rendering, means server-side and client-side with JS frameworks a little bit in the demo later.
Thank you, Duy. So I'm going to talk a bit about hybrid rendering and how does it work. There are just 3 slides, and then we're going to move to the first demo. So this has changed in the last couple of years, right? In the past, doing JavaScript for rendering meant running it on a browser with all the trade-offs, right? So there are some trade-offs. So recently, 2 years ago, so multiple frameworks, including, for example, Svelte or the new, the hype ones, they are trying to do with both sides. And recently, React introduced React server components, right? Which is an attempt from React into getting back into the hype train with JavaScript rendering. So why they do that? Because it's actually easier for the developer if you don't care about separating the code, and you have a single model where you can do your rendering and you can move it back and forth easily, right? So In short, if you have interactivity, then it should run on the client, right? That's a no-brainer. But if you render the same thing over and over, like the layout page or a collection of cards, it makes sense to do it on the server and to deliver the HTML, right? Okay. So now, if you go to, you saw the React and the React frameworks. So they usually come in pair now, right? So if you want to do React, you can no longer do React naked, right? If you go to the React developer website to do the hello world, you'll need Node.js, right? So this is a default example. So you'll likely do Next.js in that situation. It's the same for Velkit. You need a server to run it. You can export your website, so it's only client-side, but that's a secondary use case. So tables have turned a bit. Right, so serverless is back in fashion in some cases, right? Now, why do you want to do that? So, I mean, in the past we had Java server pages, and you could combine it with JavaScript, right? But there were always like two technologies that weren't perfectly blending together, right? How do you pass the data? How do you manage state? How do you load like a HTML island, right? And the new things happening in JavaScript, they help a lot, right? Because you could have exactly the same component rendered in both sides, and you can easily blend them, right? Okay, so our first demo will be with React Server components. They are running in Next.js because Next.js is the only framework at the beginning that implements them. Almost, the implementation not fully supported. Like, maybe it's not production ready completely. Okay, so in the past, when you did a Next.js JavaScript app, you had the option of doing server-side rendering and delivering your HTML at the beginning, and then you had a hydration phase where all the JavaScript code was loaded and executed, and the rendering cycle on the client side started, right? This took a heavy toll on the performance because if you measure, there was a huge blob being downloaded at the beginning in your single-page app, and you took a big hit at the beginning, and worse, the blob size was proportional to how many pages you had on your website, which is kind of not great, right? So if you go from 10 components to 20 components, your blob size doubles, right? So you don't want to do that, right? Now you can actually download it when you navigate the pages. So you no longer have like a simple single-page app. It's like a blend between a single-page app and a multi-page app. And usually the navigation is it's soft navigation on client side where only the differences are downloaded. All right. Okay, so when you, for example, you could do if you want to do a tutorial with a to-do list, adding a to-do item means re-rendering the to-do list, right? Now you could do it without leaving the page, right? Okay, and the last one, this one is funny. People will gonna hate it, but you can actually do a SQL from JavaScript now, right? I mean, we are laughing now, but wait 1 year, right? So, okay, but then what happened with the credentials, right? Where do I put? Do I need row-level security in my database? You do not, because that code is never delivered to the customer if it's server-side rendering code, right? So it's pure server-side rendering code with pure server-side credentials. You can do JavaScript, you can pull your data from Postgres and render the page and call it a day, right? Like in the good old days. Okay, zero bundle size components. What does it mean? It means they don't participate in the bundle that is being delivered to the client side, right? So you don't pay a price. It's free. You don't get this usually, right? There is a trade-off, but not in this situation. So if the adventure list here is rendered on a server only, and there's no reason to render it on the client because it's not interactive, right? It's basically expanding a content fragment in HTML. You're only going to run it on the server when you need it. So you can cache it, you can do style while revalidate, right? Look at the await fetch, right? This is not regular React code because usually you cannot do this from a rendering function because it gets executed a lot, right? So in this situation it works because it's only executed once, right? When needed. Okay, so it's pretty simple as a developer, right? You pull your data. You don't need to use hooks or deal with the state, right? Okay, so long render functions. You can render at build time and re-render it on a schedule or evict it from a cache, or you can trigger revalidation by calling a special API, right? Maybe with the AEM observability API, right? Maybe at some point. Okay, so do you wanna? Okay. Take over for you and speak about web performance.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, for like the key factors that we provision for hardware like rendering, first developer experience, and the second, of course, performance. So we have web performance matters for several reasons. First of all, is user experience, like speed matters, right? User have high expectations, so if your site is slow, they leave, resulting in the high bounce rates of your app. The second is search engine ranks, and so for example, Google prioritizes fast loading sites and the rankings. Good performance can improve SEO, and it helps when your HTML is pre-rendered on the server. Third one, conversion rate. So fast sites will lead to high conversion rates. So think about capturing lead on a product apps, or like a fast car configurator that will help to sell more. Mobile user, well, nowadays, who don't have a mobile device, so that's very critical to ensure that the performance on mobile are fast and not frustrating. Next one, competitiveness. So the advantage of your app against the competitors. And finally, sustainability, like fast loading sites normally consume less energy, and that's why contributing to the greener web. Now let's go to the demo with Lucian.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna show you two server-side like hybrid rendered websites. They are so I think I have to switch it. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I thought that I did it.
Perfect.
Make it bigger.
Yeah. Okay, it works. So make it bigger. So this is a website that pulls data from AEM, from content fragments. It's a remix of the usual weekend website. Well, it's being renamed for this demo to the daily weekend, because we are doing this almost daily. And you can see the mix of rendering between the client side and the server side. Let's start with client side components, which are obvious, right? So you can see the carousel, right? So this is rendered client side, okay? So if I turn JavaScript off, this part wouldn't work anymore, right? The navigation here. So the navigation is client side, right? So this is soft navigation. The top doesn't change; it stays in place. Only the divs, only the DOM parts underneath are changed, right? Now the pages are loading a bit small because Duy changed the resolution, right? So we're gonna the new images are not cached, but you can see the rest of it being pretty fast, right? Just look at how fast the text is coming in. Why? Because the HTML is already rendered on the server and just pulled in when needed, right? Okay, so this is also statically rendered, but the switching is client-side, right, between those collections. Okay, and of course I can click on it and go inside and see the content fragment. So, okay, so this data is coming from AEM. The GraphQL query pulls out all the adventures, and there's a separate query which pulls the data for a single adventure. It's not executed each time because the output of the HTML rendering on the server is cached and is delivered on demand with some invalidation policy. Right? Now let's see a couple of let's see a couple of client-side components. So the navigation bar. So this one is JavaScript, right? And you can see how it's blended in the rest of it. Also, the fake login page is also. So they're all React components, and there was no cheating involved, right? So if you wanna, in fact, all the components that you create on React, they are by default now server-side. So if you wanna do something on the client side, you have to mark them with a special marker, which is use client, so that they're delivered to the client, right? So this whole website, only the code for rendering the login pop-up, the toggle and the toggle for the sidebar, right? The sidebar is pre-rendered, so it's not rendered dynamically. It's the same with the menu. So the menu is rendered on the server side, right? There are some gotchas, right? You wouldn't expect that you can render server-side components from a client-side components, but it's possible, right? That's the reason there is a HTML inside a React dynamic component on the client side. So this is our first demo. So we'll come back to it a bit later, right? And then I'm going to show you a SvelteKit one. So do you remember the rankings, the hype rankings, right? That Duy showed earlier. So if you squint, you notice that React is very used, and some people want to learn it, right? So Svelte is the opposite. Like, not a lot of people are using it, but there's a lot of hype. Like, oh, I'm interested because I've read on Twitter about that guy, right? So those are two extremes. So one 10-year-old framework, right, and one upcoming framework that people maybe they want to learn something new, right, which is still being changed. So this again is a blend of server-side rendering and client-side rendering. The cards are rendered on the server side, but the switching is done on the client side, right? Now, you could, as I said earlier, you could always done that, right? Or combine JSPs with JavaScript. But now you can do it in a single language using a single paradigm, or using a single that looks the same runtime, because in the end, you still have node or functions on the server side and the browser. But it's basically the same runtime in the end. So I have some homework for you. So the URL is rsc, thedailyweekend.com. I'll post it in the Slack channel. Try to see if it works without JavaScript, right?
Yeah, we will have a slide after that we show that.
Okay,
and
so your turn.
Yeah, thank you. So you see that the first one is how the apps look like. And now, as a continuous demo of what you saw earlier from Akto and Sharanya, he will also use Universal Editor to edit the content for those hybrid render apps. Here I have two other deployments of the same apps. And the reason why we have another deployments is for the kind of the author version of the app, we turn off some kind of caching from the CDN and some optimization for the image in order to be able to have like the real content instead of like the cache content. So here I have one version for the SvelteKit app, and the other one for the Next.js React server-side component. So let me copy this URL and go to the Universal Editor. I will just open the app. And instead of trying with the default application, now I just open my authoring app. So the app looks pretty much the same as what Lucian showed you earlier. Well, it's exactly the same because it's the same source code. And here just go to, for example, I want to edit the adventures. And here comes my favorite editing that I try to edit from Bali to wherever I am. So now let's try to stop in Berlin, even though I'm not sure if the river has enough wave to do it. But anyway, yeah. So as you can see, that we can have online editing for the content of the app, and you can of course do the same for the SvelteKit one. Now let me try to refresh the app if that is OK. So I copy the URL again, go to the universal editor. Now instead of editing on the index page, let's go to one of the adventures. So now I pick the second one and go to the editing mode. And then, for example, I will make the price a bit higher because, inflation. Well, even though I'm not sure if you can fly to Portland for 400, but anyway. Yeah, so that's about the editor demo. Let me go back to the slides. And OK, so one last slide before the conclusion. Of course, those are just, as Lucian mentioned before, Next.js is like the people want to use it again compared to the hype with SvelteKit, but there are, of course, more that you can try it out. Here are some takeaways of our section. First of all, as the trend of front-end dev nowadays, it is good to have the front and the back-end bridge that you can share the code base, and then you have the same front-end developer doing both front and back-end application development with the lowest learning curve. The key factors, as I mentioned before, developer experience, web development, web performance with the support of hybrid rendering. And lastly, AEM Headless. So we, as mentioned by the headless architecture, we have the HTTP API now to get and to save content with AEM core. And then the custom code can be written in JS, and that is supported by the WYSIWYG editing with Universal Editor.
OK. So we show this combination of, let's say, React plus headless per Universal Editor. And you also saw that the Universal Editor is truly universal, right? So you saw it in at least 4 different contexts today. OK, when you should use this pattern, so do you already have React components? You have a lot of code that you want to reuse, right? Is your application having a lot of interactivity, right? Or is more like a CMS website? If it has a lot of interactivity, and then you have React problem, like managing state, right? And then do you use AEM Headless? So if it's yes to all those combinations, then you can look into this pattern, right? So we're not going to spoil it, but you can, if this combination is not made perfectly, then you can also look into AMH delivery services, which can give you slightly better lighthouse scores, and it's simpler because there are less components. Right? There is an architectural penalty to having a separate runtime from AEM. Right.
Right. Yeah. And as mentioned before, here are some references. We have the apps, the app samples published on GitHub. I think that the SvelteKit is pending, but you have it soon. And yeah, you can also try out the apps that are deployed in the following URLs. Feel free to turn off the JavaScript browser on browser, as Lucian mentioned, to see if it works. And yeah, we also use the AEM Headless client JS SDK to pull content out of AEM. That's it. I think we are at roughly noon. Feel free to have any question if you will.
Thank you, Chance. Yeah, till about 2 minutes ago, there were almost no questions. Now they're filled up, so we have still some time left. So Adele would like to know, SQL from frontend might be good, but what about SQL injections?
OK, so if you're going to do it, don't use string manipulation, right? Use templating, and there are some JavaScript frameworks which allow you to actually validate the the parameters, right? So yeah, you should pay usually attention into that, right?
Where is the JS backend runtime hosted, and how does it access AEM content?
So in those examples, so I'll take the first half. Okay, so in those examples, they are both running in Azure, right? They have so-called static web apps, which are not statical, as you can see, but I think they kept the name. You can also host them on Vercel, and you can also host them on AWS. They have a similar service, or you can run your own node, and yeah, it works. They have Fastlink from, and they pull the data from.
Yeah, from AEM Headless content fragments. So as I mentioned before, the Headless GraphQL client to query the fragments, as well as where you can use both post and persistent queries to get content from AEM. Shameless teaser, I have another section tomorrow with Dragon, which we will talk more about that. So stay tuned.
Exactly. Tomas, he likes me read. He has a long question. Would like to know, what should invoke rendered of the server-side content cache invalidation? Is the service plugin layer in Universal Editor? Question mark. What should invoke render of a new page added? Where will that should be invoked in AEM Headless?
So we don't have an integration out of the box for it, right? But there's a notification API where you can get notified and maybe run a function when a content fragment is published or modified. So in theory, somebody could invalidate that specific page, right? Yeah. But we haven't tried for this demo. That's the reason we use two different endpoints. One which is pointing to publish, which is like fast and it uses all the cache policies, and one that doesn't have almost any caching that Duy used in the Universal Editor.
So now, interesting question. Do you see this completely replacing Sling in the future?
Well, no. As I mentioned before, we have like the two stacks. If you're a Java developer that you're familiar with like writing Java, I don't see any reason why you don't do it anymore. And if you're like freshman out of university, which you pretty much familiar with JS and all the frameworks, then just you can have both options, and that's a good part, right?
Yeah, and I think what's best at this pattern is that it's incremental. So you could imagine some routing at the beginning and have some pages rendered in this way and other pages, so you can adopt it gradually, right? But more is more. It's simply more choice, right?
Yeah. Does navigation already qualify as highly interactive?
Well, that's a good question, because it's not very clear what's going on. So if I click something in the React Server Components app, there's typically a client-side router doing the navigation and only pulling in the part of the DOM that is changed, right? But what happens with JavaScript off? So the fallback is calling the routing, a similar router on the server, which gives you the same page, right? So the routing is always dual. There's a router running on client side and the same router running on server side, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's also going to be possibility to ask more questions tomorrow during the panel discussions. There's going to be one specific to AEM Headless, and we're going to have like on the playground session a table around AEM Headless. So a lot of possibility to ask more questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.